Calling, 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 calling. Call the GrowthBusters. Whoa, whoa, whoa.
Welcome to the GrowthBusters podcast. And if you were expecting Paving Paradise, don't sweat a thing. Your iTunes isn't having a meltdown. What we're doing is we're morphing Paving Paradise into GrowthBusters. So goodbye, Paving Paradise. Hello, GrowthBusters podcast. This is Dave Gardner, one of your co-hosts, and I'm really thrilled to introduce to you my two co-hosts, Caitlin Hickman. Say hi.
Hi. I'm excited to be here.
And we have Ben Bacher.
Yeah, I'm excited. This is my first podcast recording session ever. Should be a good time.
Why are you guys here?
I'm here because I'm excited to talk about ways of reducing our impact and just relevant news when it comes to growth. I think it's super important.
Yeah, same. I'm kind of similar reasons. The three of us often have talk about things we see in the news and whatnot, and different conversations and different perspectives. And I'm excited just to chat with you guys and talk about what we hear.
That was the voice of Ben there. You'll have to figure out how to distinguish between Ben and Dave. Caitlin will be pretty obvious, but I'm Dave, and I founded the GrowthBusters project. I produced and directed the documentary GrowthBusters, Hooked on Growth, and I pretty much dedicated my life to busting the myth of prosperity from growth and busting our civilization's love affair with economic growth and population growth, and finding a way to get us into a 12-step recovery program for growth addiction. And we're hoping that this podcast might help everybody with that. So regardless of why you found your way here, I think we're going to have something for you. Whether you're an activist or just somebody who just, the name GrowthBusters caught your eye and you were curious to find out what the heck are they busting? Not ghosts, but growth. We'd love to do this once a week. We're not promising that we'll be able to keep that pace up, but if we can, we will. And hopefully in each episode, at least, there'll be some common things. We have a few segments that we want to do every time, but most of the time we're just going to be reacting to what we found in the news, what's worthy of comment, and really what we can learn from those news stories. And in fact, we've got a big one that we want to talk about right off the top. Today we want to talk about a new study that came out recently, right?
Yeah.
And that study is about, it really links our procreation with our carbon footprint. The name of the study, The Climate Mitigation Gap. Education and government recommendations miss the most effective individual actions.
It was definitely, well, it wasn't a super surprising study for me, but I think most people miss that the most effective action a person can take against climate change is having fewer children. And that's the main point of the study.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I guess I was kind of surprised. I don't know, because I think about like all the small things that you do that they don't necessarily feel small, but I was kind of surprised at how, like, compared with having one less child, like how much of an impact that has compared with like trying to turn the lights off or drive a hybrid. I don't know. And so that was kind of surprising for me.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think it was really huge because I've been following the public dialogue for years about things related to growth, and population growth is a big factor. There's no question that we are overpopulated. There are 7.6 billion human beings on the planet today, and we're really kind of crushing our life support systems under this heavy load. And yet we've been talking about climate change for decades. Certainly the volume of that conversation has gotten a lot higher lately, but missing from that conversation altogether, I don't think I've ever heard or seen a news story before. Really 12 months ago was the first time, but before that I don't think I'd ever seen it mentioned, the idea that how many children you choose to conceive has anything to do with your carbon footprint.
Right.
Well, and what I was interested in, I was just reading a couple of articles related, like in preparation for this, and talking about Japan specifically and how their birth rate is very low, and it's actually considered a national disaster almost, just because they're very concerned about the workforce and the tax revenue that the government is going to have. And it just made me think about how built into the system it is that if you don't have, if the birth rate is going down and you're taxed, that means the government's not getting as much tax revenue, which just limits growth, and it's just unacceptable.
Now, we should add that not everyone considers it a disaster that Japan's birth rate is low. Right. In fact, most of the Japanese are just fine with that. They're the ones who are making that decision not to create as many new human beings. They're perfectly happy with it. They live pretty good lives in Japan. It's mostly the economists and the government bean collectors who have a problem with that.
Right.
And what's interesting about that, I don't want to get off on too much of a tangent, but they're worried about the size of the economy. They need more new citizens who would be consumers, taxpayers, laborers, so that there's more products being made. They have to have more consumers to consume those products. And then there's taxes to collect because of that economic activity.
Right.
But you know what? If there are fewer taxpayers to serve, then shouldn't you need less tax revenue?
But I think the issue with that is that in the long term, that sounds like a good plan. But the problem is that when in 20 years or so, they're predicting that 40% of Japan's population will be over 75. And so if the whole population was lesser, I think that would be a great thing. But it's just with this huge older population now and such a small amount of young people like who are serving in the workforce kind of.
Have you got something against us old folks? Is that what this is about?
No, but I agree that like it's definitely like what we should strive for, but they're also like it's so baked into the economic system that we run on that we kind of do need it, like it's built in that you have to have this influx that keeps coming in and keeps powering it. So the older generations kind of.
Yeah, it's a Ponzi scheme, basically.
Right.
Yeah. And you're talking about the pain of the breakdown of a Ponzi scheme. There's what happens is as a country's fertility rate declines, you end up with a bubble of an aging population.
Right.
Because there's not as many younger people filling that pipeline, but it's a temporary situation. And some people might propose, wow, that looks kind of like a problem. So why don't we get people making babies? Yep. So what if we're going to completely destroy the planet and civilization? At least we don't have to. We don't have to think hard about how to deal with this relatively minor problem of a temporary aging bubble.
Right.
Yeah. No, it's hard because both criticisms are valid, and it's like no matter what we do right now, there are going to be severe repercussions. Yeah. And that's just a hard truth to swallow for anybody. So maybe if you're in that bubble of people who won't be supported if there are less babies to take care of you, then that's a hard pill to swallow. But that generation is also going to be dealing with really, really severe, droughts and
Right. It's almost like a decision to like decide who to screw over, kind of like whether you screw over the people who are 75 or older or the future generations.
But on the severity scale,
right.
There's a huge difference.
If we talk about 7 generations from now too, then
right. Yeah. But I think it's just really hard for people, and especially politicians who you get voted into office every year, like to look that far into the future. I agree. I think it's important, but it's just, I think politicians, it's just like you can't, you have to prioritize who's alive right now, which sucks.
Right.
I don't know.
So anyway, Caitlin and I, we've been working all summer on great educational outreach programs for GrowthBusters. And so we see this NPR headline. It was a story on National Public Radio's Morning Edition about this study. And the headline was, "Want to Slow Global Warming? Researchers Look to Family Planning." And this kind of comes on the tail of a year of really great media coverage of this link, thanks to the work of a bioethicist, Travis Reeder, at Johns Hopkins. university who's found a way to actually start talking intelligently and rationally and sensitively and compassionately about the idea of maybe we have some kind of a moral responsibility to consider very carefully how many children we bring into the world, especially when you consider what a huge impact they have on our carbon footprint. And so Caitlin and I, we say, wow, this is great. Travis has been making headlines. He was on National Public Radio. He was on Bill Nye Saves the World. And now we have an NPR story, and several other mainstream news organizations covered this study. I think it was in Forbes. It was in the UK Guardian. And so we decided, hey, World Population Day is coming up. Let's make a video.
We took to the streets of Colorado Springs and we interviewed people about whether they believed we had any moral responsibility to have smaller families, and got a lot of mixed results. It was a really interesting experiment and had a lot of really productive conversations too, which I wasn't expecting, because I think productive conversations are becoming rarer and rarer in this political climate. But
well, that's a good point on the political climate, but on the procreation, limiting your procreation front, I would never have, 2 years ago, I would never have thought, let's go out on the street and do man on the street and woman on the street interviews about this subject. I would not think that I would survive,
Right.
walking up to complete strangers and saying, let's have a conversation about this. But all of this mainstream media coverage made me think, wow, maybe it's time. And so we sort of did. It was a totally random survey we did, which was to find out whether we were pelted with stones and running out of town on a rail, or whether people thought, yeah, let's have this conversation. And really was surprising that very few people, almost none of the people that we accosted on the street were offended by the questions we asked. Is that fair to say?
yeah, and I don't think anyone was unwilling to at least talk about it.
Well, and I think it's really cool that the NPR article and just talking about this coverage in a different light, just because I think what most people know about trying to limit children is China's policies of like you're only being allowed to have 2 children, and the negative effects that have resulted from that, such as children, like people want a boy child, and so they'll literally
yeah.
Yeah, and it wasn't 2; it was mostly 1 child.
Really? Wow, I didn't know that. Okay.
That's the famous China one-child policy.
Right. And so, because I just felt that it seemed like some people, some of the responses they got seemed to assume that was where we were leading, that we were implying that the U.S. should have a law that limits how many children, and that they seemed to think we were talking about legislating as opposed to doing it through a moral. Right, exactly. Yeah.
It was a pretty short video, and I know we can't show it because this is a podcast, but why don't we give it a quick listen?
Yeah, sounds good.
How would you feel if I suggested that we start strongly suggesting that we have a moral responsibility to have smaller families?
I agree.
Yeah, we need to cut back a little bit. We need to learn to keep our pants on.
If you decided to become a green superhero and you changed all your light bulbs and rode your bike to work like you are today and recycled like crazy and really had a green life, that in your lifetime you would shave about 388 metric tons off of your carbon footprint. But if you had made the decision to have 1 fewer child, that shaves about 9,441 metric tons.
I don't think you can dictate how many kids a family can have.
Maybe drones. We could have drones right outside the bedroom window.
No, you can't pass laws to deal with morality. It's more education and opportunity too.
Now, this spay and neuter campaign that you're proposing, would it be voluntary? Well, I don't think we're that far off, because I'm not suggesting that we send a SWAT team into the bedroom to enforce something.
Yeah.
I'm just suggesting that we let people know.
Oh, well then proclaim array.
Is it time for us to start talking about whether people have a moral responsibility to have smaller families?
Yes and no. It's definitely a slippery slope, but it's something to think about. So,
Okay.
Yeah.
So slippery slope, I think she's referring to, today we're maybe having the conversation about suggesting, and then tomorrow we might be following some of the bad policies that we've experienced in the past that weren't such a good idea.
Right.
But everyone, most of those people were okay with having that conversation.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and I think that sentiment that, like, I think she's afraid of coercion or forcefully taking away people's choices. But I think the cool thing that I've learned from reading some of Travis Reeder's work is that there are ways to provide people with more choice in family planning, not less choice. So he advocates for a lot of choice enhancing methods like education. And I think that that's a really important distinction.
Now, we came back from filming that day, Caitlin, and you were troubled.
Yeah.
What troubled you?
I was surprised by, or I shouldn't say surprised. No, I was. Yeah. I was surprised by the really, really common sentiment that overpopulation is a problem in other countries, and the countries that people tended to list were like India, Africa, and China. And people made these huge generalizations about, other places. They were really vague and just talked about how people in those countries far away from us are having way higher birth rates and way more children, and that it can't be a problem in the US because our birth rate is lower here. And that troubled me for a lot of reasons. One being that that doesn't take into account ecological footprint in depending on where you live and how developed or underdeveloped your country is. So like in the US, where we're really consumerism obsessed and driven by capitalism, the average individual will drain 35 times the resources as an individual from India and consume 53 times more goods and services than someone from China. And I think that it's really important to talk about, how big of an impact one person has in the US.
I agree, because I understand I think the generalization of like Africa or like Asia is like a big overgeneralization. But I think when you come at overpopulation as a single pronged issue of just like straight the most number of people on the planet, then I understand that approach of just like, because if you look at the top 10 countries in birth rates, all 10 of them are in Africa. And so if your only goal is just to reduce the number of people, then it does make sense that you do have to cut the number of people, like the birth rates in the countries that have the highest birth rates. But I agree that I think that's like, that's too simple, because one person in the US will have with 35 times the amount of impact that one person in Niger will have. So if they're having 5 children per woman, it's still worse to have one child in the US. So
so we should note that it's generally considered that a 2.1 average fertility rate is replacement level, 2.1. And in the U.S., our fertility rate is somewhere maybe just a little below 1.9, I think. I mean, it's fairly impressive, although it's not as impressive as some countries in Europe that have fertility rates down at 1.3, 1.5, below replacement rate. And that's what's, Japan would be a good example in Asia, and that causes some of those economists and the government bean counters to be concerned about the size of their economy. So people tend to think that, if we are at or below replacement level,
we're good.
The job is done.
Right.
Yeah. Problem solved. And yet, if we're consuming, like I said I mentioned in the video out on the streets, I mentioned that we're 5% of the world's population and using about 25% of the world's resources. So obviously there are too many people in the United States. If for our level of consumption, we're way overpopulated. If we're not changing our level of consumption, then we need to be well below 1.9 for a good bit of time to get our population down to where we are 5% of the world's population using 5% of the resources, or 2% of the world's population using 2% of the resources.
But for me, I think in the U.S., the focus should be more on the reduction of like the resources we're using. I think there's also I think it's also important to like have family planning and choice available, but I think that for me, I kind of feel like that it's our bigger problem is that we're using 35 times the amount of someone in another country, and that for me that number is the more concerning number. Do you disagree?
Well, Ben, I disagree with the thought process of having to decide which one of these we should put more focus on. We're so far into overshoot in the United States, especially that we don't get to pick. We got to work on both. We got to work on both of them like crazy.
Well, and I think I even if we're just talking about choice, the fact that in 2011, 45% of pregnancies in the U.S. each year were unintended, like. That's huge. If we made it so all pregnancies were intentional, then our population or our birth rate would go way down.
Yeah. Good point. And the other point I'd like to make about that is we haven't had much success so far with getting the over-consuming world to consume less. Yeah. But we've had incredible success without even hardly trying of getting the world. The world has been moving toward a much lower fertility rate. The global average fertility rate 50 years ago was 6 point something, I think, and today it's a little under 2.5. I mean, so we have demonstrated as human beings have demonstrated that they will choose smaller families over time. So far, we haven't demonstrated that we will choose to consume less. Now, that doesn't mean we shouldn't work on it. It just means we shouldn't ignore the easier win should be on our agenda.
But for me, an issue I see with that is that as we've debated the causation and correlation in as countries get more developed, generally their fertility rate drops. But what concerns me is that perhaps we see a deeper drop in fertility rates and say eventually we get the world fertility rate to somewhere around 1.8 or 1.9, slightly below replacement level. But then what I'm concerned about is that then the consumption rates could mirror the United States. And so
that would be the natural thing to expect.
Exactly. So we're getting better with one problem, but getting way worse with another problem. And so I think there's some danger in that.
Totally. Yeah. We can't let that happen. Yeah. And I would not say let's not focus on getting our consumption under control. We've got to work on that.
For sure. For sure.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's interesting that you brought up how much lower the fertility rates are now, because I think that was another thing that bothered me was the assumption. I think if you're going to be critical of another country or another person, I think you have to do it with a lot of specificity and be really careful about how you criticize other places. Like if you're not going to acknowledge that it's a problem that you have too. And in 1960, the fertility rate in India was 5.9 children per woman on average, and it's down to 2.4 now. So that's huge, and I think people still talk about India as if.
Well, and it has way too many people, no question about it. And then when you have that huge base of people, even at a low fertility rate, you're still adding a lot of human beings every year, and that's definitely a problem. But I don't think it's our place to criticize to begin with. Even if we were living perfectly, it would be our place to make recommendations, to recommend. Did you know what's happening to the planet because we're not being more careful? We could stand to be more careful about how many children we have. And everybody, when you're making a decision about whether to conceive a child or not, or what kind of family you want to have when you're a young adult couple, I think you need to know. You need to know what the carbon footprint implications are. You need to know that the world is already overpopulated, and you need to know that especially if you're in the overdeveloped world, if you're in the U.S. or Canada or most of Europe, UK, Australia, you need to know that if you really want to live that lifestyle and you want your children to live that lifestyle, that the world can only support everybody doing that if there are 1 billion of us instead of 8 billion or more.
Right.
And most people don't know that and don't put that into the calculus.
Yeah. And on top of that, a really key thing is that that's assuming that family planning is a right that everybody has access to, but it's not right now. There's a huge imbalance in that. And there's a correlation between the more developed that a country becomes, I think generally the more access to education and family planning and contraception there is, but that's not the case right now. So it's not fair to to point to a less developed country and be critical of the women or the families or the people there who maybe don't even have access to safe and voluntary contraceptives.
Yeah, and I think part of the problem, one of the things that has kept us from being able to have the kind of conversations that are starting to finally bubble up are, all of this emotional baggage. And one bit of emotional baggage is, how dare you in the overdeveloped world overconsume, use way more than your share of resources, and tell someone in sub-Saharan Africa that they need to have fewer children, that they're causing a problem, that you don't have anything you need to be fixing. It basically kind of comes off as, and I think that's really a reality, that you're saying, you know what, I want to continue flying too much, eating and drinking too much, wasting too much, having too big a house, spending too much time in my automobile, and you had better limit your family size so I can keep doing that.
Exactly.
Totally. No recognition of privilege.
Yeah, and that's just, that's a non-starter. You just can't, who's going to listen to your recommendations if that's where you're coming from?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
You got no moral foundation for making the recommendation. I'd rather be saying, you know what, we blew it. Don't become an over-consuming society like we are. We've got to go cold turkey and stop it. Don't follow in our footprints.
Right.
Sorry, we blew it, but we're working on it now. We're trying to fix that.
But it's such a hard issue to tackle, just because it's just like there's some things that we've done that definitely countries that are developing don't need to follow, but then there are other things that are human rights kind of that are, I don't know, just I think of a lot of infrastructure things that would result in developing countries having a much larger footprint, but it's hard to say that they shouldn't have them. I don't know.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that.
Right. I know, but I just think as probably as conditions get better, it will result in more consumption to some degree. I imagine.
No doubt.
Right.
Yeah, we actually have to leave room for the developing world to actually increase the size of their footprint.
Right. Yeah, I agree.
Bit.
Right.
Which
and
is,
try to not go to the excess that we've taken it, but to get it to a level of acceptability, and we have to sink down and not sink down. Go down to that level as well, or that should be the plan.
It might be helpful to kind of think long term and think about, well, where do we want to be? What would the world look like? What would a sustainable world look like maybe in 6 or 7 months? I think we could get there, don't you? Eventually we need to be at a place where the poorest populations in the world aren't poor. They have their needs are met.
Right.
And the richest, what today are the richest populations, still have their needs met, but they have scaled way back.
Right.
And the world population is at a level where we're not killing our life-supporting ecosystems living that way with that many people.
Right.
Well, and I think it's just such a hard question because, I think it's the people who are living in developing countries want to get there, but how do we convince or coerce people in developing countries to change their lifestyles that they're just because developed countries I meant just because I think people, whether it's conscious or unconscious, people really don't want to lose that. They don't want to, and I understand that. I don't want to lose flying home to visit my family and a lot of other decisions. And so it's a hard question for me, and I have trouble thinking about what solutions we can propose that help people have a pretty dramatic change in their lifestyle. I don't know, without alienating people.
Yeah, you bring up I think one of the toughest tasks ahead of us, and that may be, in fact, why we may not have any choice but to really aim for getting world population down below 2 billion, just because we can't take the candy away, because of human nature. I hope I'm wrong. I'm not saying that that's my prognosis, but I think that's going to be the battle.
I think you're right.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's hard because it's so built into so many of our institutions.
Yeah.
I maybe wouldn't have gone to a school far away from my home had I thought about the carbon footprint of traveling by plane each year. But I kind of learned about that in college. And I just think about, how we're in a system right now where you're sort of wired to move away and have friends all over the country and sort of all over the world as we become more and more globalized. And that's just one thing.
I wonder I mean, the distinction of like first world, second world, third world is definitely very problematic. But I wonder if the U.S. could shift to a level of carbon use as a second world country. Like, I wonder if, say, Argentina, I'm just interested in if you change the output of carbon for each person in the U.S. to the output of carbon for someone in Argentina, I wonder what that would look like. Because to me, I could see that happening, and it would be a distinct shift in lifestyle, but I don't think it would be wild. I don't know. Like, I don't think it would be something that I couldn't see happening.
Right. It would just, it just depends on how we plan and propose to get people to change their lifestyles.
For sure.
I don't know. I think about how hard it's been to make little changes in my own life and how hard it is for my friends who I know believe in climate change, which a significant proportion of people in the US don't even believe in climate change. And if it's hard for the people who do to like eat less meat and drive less and travel less, then how we incentivize people to make changes in their lives is daunting.
And it's that question of like how much, like trying to not make people feel like, I feel like there's a danger of like guilt overload where people just like feel really guilty or like that the problem is too huge and you just ignore it. And I definitely feel that sometimes, but then it's also like how much should, I don't know, how much should we make people feel guilty or like bad?
Because that's funny that you bring that up, because in the article in the Scientific American that I've been pulling a lot of statistics from, one of the things that I don't know how they got statistics on this, but they studied like the US was one of the countries that had the highest rate of believing that individual actions can make a difference when it comes to climate change, and also one of the lowest rates of taking those actions, and also one of the lowest rates of feeling guilty about not doing that, compared to countries that are less developed, where individuals are taking more drastic actions.
Interesting.
And that was, that screamed at me.
You know, people have done the work that you described to kind of get to the answer of, well, who out there in the world today is living at the kind of lifestyle that we would need to adopt for us to be sustainable. And I don't have it at my fingertips, but I think we should consider that a homework assignment to come back with that information next episode. Did you find it already?
It's a rough proxy, but the US's emissions per capita of CO2 are 16.1 and Argentina are 4.4. So it'd be cutting it into a quarter.
Yeah, but did you do any math to come up with Argentina, or did you just pull that out?
I pulled Argentina out because I lived in Argentina for 6 months, and I was just trying to think. Obviously, there's so many differences just because I don't think Argentina is as big of a manufacturing output as the United States. But I was just trying to compare like the lifestyle of an average person, just because that's a change that I could see theoretically happening in 20 years. Where
so you chose Argentina because you think that wouldn't be so bad.
No, exactly. Because I think people, like it just, what Caitlin talked about, people going to school, like in Argentina, it's virtually unheard of to travel to school. You live with your family and you go to the school in your town, which they actually have a very good university system. And like most people take public transportation. There's very few cars. And so that just seemed something to me that doesn't seem that wild of a change in something that like maybe people could strive to.
Yeah. So that just leaves the question, if let's say the whole world managed to hit that milestone, that lifestyle level, would that be enough? And of course the other variable in that equation is, well, how many people are on the planet living at that lifestyle?
Right.
But that would be good for us to find out. Is let's say we think that's manageable. It would be, in many ways an improvement over the way we live today.
Yeah.
We'll have to talk about that one of these days. But we will find out that only gets us to sustainable, non-planet crunching net impact if there are only, I don't know what the answer is, 2 billion, 3 billion, So I think that's what we want to know. How many people living like Argentinians will give us a sustainable world? And once we find that out, then everyone's going to have a different opinion. There's going to be people out there and there are people out there today who say, you know what, I love living very high on the hog. I want us to get world population down to 100 million so that we can all live hugely.
Right.
But there are other people who are going to say, wow, I really am not comfortable with even suggesting how many people a couple should create.
Yeah.
So I think, let's all live, in thatched roof huts and give up electricity and do whatever else we have to do so that we don't ever have to make a suggestion to somebody about how many children they have. And then somewhere in the middle is, I think, this intelligent conversation we're having. Let's say, well, we could live like Argentinians, and if we did, what's our goal for population? And then let's just all see if we can't make sure a couple who is making family-size decisions has good information, and we would hope that they would do the right thing, that we wouldn't have to implement some coercion to get them to do that.
But I think it's hard because I think what you were sort of just getting at is that it's relative, and I think we're having this conversation based on a lot of privileges that we have and based on our backgrounds with this information, and not everyone has access to those things either. So, but I think starting the conversation is huge, because then at least people can start talking about it from their individual backgrounds and figuring out what seems reasonable to them. And I don't know, I think that kind of thing has a ripple effect. And gradually it suddenly becomes a lot more reasonable.
Yeah, and you guys have seen it. This has been a watershed 12 months since we started hearing news about Travis Reeder's search for morality and the ethics of family-size decisions. I think it's almost a tipping point. We've gone from how dare you talk about it to, wow, maybe we can start thinking about it.
Right.
And we'll see, but we still have lots of edging forward to go. Does that complete your list of things that troubled you from that?
Yeah, I think so. I could probably talk about it for the rest of the day, but no one wants to listen to a 7-hour podcast.
Okay, that's right. We're going to try to keep this down to 2 hours max, right? not even.
I think next we were going to talk about, speaking of family planning being a privilege and not a human right, what's going on with family planning rights in the U.S.
Right, yeah. And so we just found a news article that the Trump administration just cut $213 billion to $213 million, for research grants to prevent teen pregnancy. And these grants actually came from the Obama administration. And so the research was halfway through. And so this move was pretty unusual because they're halfway through their research and now it's just thrown out the window. And a lot of money has been cut for Planned Parenthood. And so we were just thinking it was interesting, kind of connected with that we're worried about other countries that don't have access to family planning, whereas in the U.S. it's a real issue too. And it's interesting that it's become a very politicized issue when it's not really necessarily a political topic, in my opinion.
Yeah, it really is too bad. And I guess that's attached to this. It's just sort of on the coattails of this anti-abortion sentiment that has become, that really, I think the Catholic Church has really skillfully managed to put the far right conservative political arm in the U.S. and in many parts of the world to work for them in trying to eliminate abortion, which is a goal that we can all agree is a positive goal. We all want to have fewer abortions, but is the way to do that to attack
fewer needs
to attack all family planning and
fewer
needs for abortion.
Yeah, fewer needs for abortions, which I think that's a really key distinction. Like that, if a woman, like women deserve control over their bodies, and if a woman chooses to not have a child and the way for that to happen is through an abortion, then I think that's I
agree completely. I also think I believe I agree with you 100% that I think abortion should be a right and that women should be able to control their bodies, but I also think it doesn't necessarily have to be connected. I mean it's connected, but I just think what makes me mad is the defunding of Planned Parenthood on the basis of abortion, whereas they do so many things that aren't abortion.
Yes.
And there are so many important... I like what you were saying. Hopefully we get to the point where we don't need as many abortions. And so I think it's so key to have better education and better access to contraceptives. Like I think just recently in Colorado, there was a law passed that now you can get contraceptives over the counter. And I just think that's so huge that which is something I just wish people who are against abortion would understand, that if you don't want abortions, then let's stop unwanted pregnancies in the first place.
Yeah.
There you go.
I mean, it's called Planned Parenthood. It's focused on family planning, not killing babies.
Right.
That's not what they do.
So, but there, unfortunately, there's this war on family planning.
Yeah.
I mean, it's totally misplaced.
Right.
Totally misplaced.
Because abortion just gets lumped in, and then it's like, boom, if you're conservative, you're against family planning. End of story.
Right. Which actually increases the abortion rate, which is ironic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just wish there could be if you just set aside abortion, it's a very important issue, but I feel like right now with the political climate, there's very little that can get done. But I wish there could be a coalition in Washington of people from both sides who are everyone can agree we don't want unplanned pregnancies. Let's do something about it that we can provide access to. I don't know. I guess it goes against family values to be saying that people are having sex before marriage, but it's just you just have to accept that that's happening, and not everyone believes what you believe. I think I don't know.
Which is interesting because going along with the defunding of Planned Parenthood and Planned Family research is that funding for abstinence-only sex education programs has increased from 55 million to 85 million in 2016.
What?
Yeah. And that's hopefully obviously problematic because abstinence-only education totally ignores the needs of teenagers who deserve to know how to make sex healthy and safe, because they are engaging in sexual activity, whether or not we want to acknowledge it as a country. And it places young people at increased risk of pregnancy and STIs. And again, if you want to limit abortions, don't create unplanned pregnancies. Yeah.
And in a recent study, they found that 49% of people who had graduated high school said they had sexual intercourse during high school. And so it's just if you use...
Wait, what was the percentage?
49%.
Jeez.
Yeah.
I was a late bloomer. Darn. Not that I wasn't trying.
But yes, so I think it's just some people are just living in a world of fantasy that it's I wish people wouldn't have sex until marriage, but I think you just have to be a realist and grasp that this is happening, and how can we make it safe and acceptable? Now,
there's nothing wrong with, if you believe that's important, with trying to encourage abstinence. Of course. You can try to encourage abstinence.
Right.
And I think the problem is that those who do really want that abstinence are afraid that, having family planning services and having contraception available and having other kinds of sex education just encourages people to make the wrong choice.
Right. That's a really good point.
We have to somehow get away from that because you're just not going to win that abstinence-only quest, unfortunately.
No, because, it's true. Abstinence is the only 100% effective birth control method, and perhaps it is better. No, I agree with that.
But it just ends up resulting in a lot of shaming.
Exactly, right.
Yeah, that's pretty sad. So where does that take us? Are we this whole conversation began with this study about how bringing fewer children into the world is by far the most effective action that you can take if you're trying to reduce your carbon footprint and really keep us from completely destroying the habitable climate that we've been enjoying for thousands of years. And in some ways, that made it look like, wow, the news was that so many of the things that we're doing today in our daily lives to reduce our carbon footprint are really tiny
Right.
Tiny impact, relatively speaking. So does that mean that we should just give those, we should give those up? We should drive relentlessly and fly all we want and just have only one child or 0 kids and we're good to go?
Well, I think it's, I think it's really important to not feel discouraged. And just like coming from my family, I have 3 sisters. My parents had 4 kids. And so I think when you hear that, it can be easy to be like, well, shit, too late. Like I might, right. Like you were saying. But I think it still counts. And when you add it up across the whole 7.5 billion people in the world, it really makes a huge difference and every person matters. And so I think it's important to be able to do the small things. Like, my family, we, with the drought in California, there were recently water restrictions placed in Santa Cruz where I live. And so my family tried to really cut down on our water usage. And so one thing we did was that when we were showering, we'd put a bucket underneath the faucet. So when the water was warming up, we'd get the bucket full of water and then you turn the shower on, put the bucket away. And then we'd use the bucket to flush the toilet because if you pour water into the bowl of the toilet, it will actually flush the toilet. And each time you flush a toilet, it uses 10 gallons of water. And that's a huge, huge amount.
So this is what you were doing with the water that you used to just let go down the drain while you were letting the water warm up. Yeah.
Right.
Very smart.
And so, I think it's really important to try to think of like little things like that you can do. That's not just like huge things, but over your whole life, like it really adds up and makes a difference.
And that's a great segue into a segment that we hope to be a recurring segment, right? Which so far we're calling it lightening our load.
Yeah.
For lack of a better name. If any listener has a better name for this segment, we're open to better ideas. But we thought that in each podcast that we would share something interesting that we're doing to lighten our load. Great thing. Put a bucket in the shower and don't waste that water.
Mm-hmm.
Sure. I just had another going off of that. I think that sometimes little things sound daunting to people, like, oh, I have to go find a 5-gallon bucket.
Right.
I'm just wondering, like, now that you're in the habit of doing that, is it hard for you? Is it taking away from your quality of life?
It's easy. It's just like you have most people have buckets somewhere around the house, and it's just like we're just wasting so much gray water. But I think it's also important, kind of related to that it's like, just because that's what's easy for me, and like you don't have to be doing obviously it's great if you can, but if that grosses you out, like you don't want to be pouring water into your toilet or something, it's like there are other things you can do as well. I don't know.
Right. It's not all or nothing, but I think it's a good point to make that it's not as hard or daunting.
It's so easy. Right.
A cool tip that Dave and I came across when we were talking to some local foodies earlier this week was the concept of the protein flip burger. And I thought that was really cool because I'm vegan. That
alone is a huge carbon footprint reduction action, by the way.
But I know how daunting that is for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And so the concept of the protein flip burger is that most Americans are eating way too much meat, which is not a sustainable thing. So, you can make a burger with 1/3 meat and 1/3 grains and 1/3 veggies, and you'll still get that yummy, meaty taste that you crave if that's what you're into, and won't be consuming quite as much carbon.
And those were quite tasty tasty too, I have to say. Yeah.
And I think that concept is huge, just because I know I think I might have said this before, but I felt that before, that it's just being vegan or vegetarian is a really huge jump. And I think just that of like, it still matters if you can cut down how much meat you're eating. That's still a big thing you can do, huge. Even if you're not going to be completely vegan. If you try to have meat once or twice a week, or
that's one of my biggest pet peeves about veganism, is that people assume that it's this cult and you're either in or you're out. But any time that you cut down, it's huge.
Right. It's not all or nothing. And I grew up in a steak and potatoes family, and now I eat meat maybe once a week. And you could criticize me if you want for not going all vegan, and maybe I will at some point. I'm on a journey trying to lighten my load a little bit more with each passing week or month. But it's interesting to discover that veganism doesn't compete with having one fewer child. I mean, one fewer child
that's true.
is so huge compared to that I guess my comment about that would be, if you have gone vegan, if you have given up your automobile, if you've done all these other things to shrink your carbon footprint, but you have 8 kids, sorry, kind of wasted your time.
Hey, I think that's the opposite of what we're trying to say here. If you've had 8 kids and you didn't have knowledge about
right,
we forgive
that's
you. Here's what you can do now.
That's the least. Yeah, that's the least you can do is go vegan, because you really blew it every other way. But if you can get your 8 kids to go vegan, now you're talking. And that, that's kind of the point, is that it still adds up. If you have, if millions or billions of people do these little things, they're not insignificant.
Right.
Even though
every person counts.
Even though they're less significant than having fewer children. And my contribution to the lightening your load thing this week is that they've been repaving the street that I have to drive up the hill to come home. And fortunately, I do not get in a car every day to commute, so I'm pretty proud of my vehicular carbon footprint, and I'm working to reduce that even more. But I had to stop just yesterday. I had to stop in line and wait while they had our one lane closed. And so there was this line of vehicles waiting, and I guarantee you almost every one of them was just sitting there idling and wasn't even thinking about it. But it's kind of present in mind for me, so I immediately turned off the engine of my Prius, which wasn't really burning that much gas anyway. But I turned it off. I turned off the car. I rolled down the windows, turned off the car so that I wasn't using any energy while I sat there for 10 minutes waiting until it was our turn to go.
Does the Prius engine, it doesn't turn off automatically when you stop?
Well, the engine does.
Okay.
But the electronics are
battery,
still, you're basically drawing down on your on your battery, which then has to be recharged at some point.
That makes sense.
So, yeah. And plus, I just want to set a good example.
Yeah.
So, but just think about how many millions of automobiles are sitting in construction waiting for 5 minutes or 10 minutes, and how many people aren't turning off their engine, or how many parents are sitting in line this afternoon or soon with the start of school coming up, waiting to pick up their kids. And how many of those vehicles are sitting there idling when they could have just rolled down the windows and turned off their engines. That adds up when you're talking about millions of those. So that's my little tip, is that if your car is going to be stopped for more than, I think, 12 seconds is the what the scientists tell us, that it's you use less gasoline to turn off your engine than you would restarting it, because it uses a little more gas apparently to restart it. If you're stopped for more than 12 seconds, your better bet is to just turn off your engine. And, you see people just having a conversation. They pull out of their driveway, a neighbor's walking by, they stop and have a conversation, and they end up talking for 5 minutes. And the motor's running the whole time. Come on.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So I don't mean to be critical, but I would like to suggest that you just think about that when you're sitting still in your motor vehicle.
This is kind of a silly transgression, but you're talking about like the 12 seconds thing. It reminded me of this thing I was reading in the blog. In this blog I follow, it's a stats blog, and they were discussing whether it's water efficient to pee in the shower. And they actually found out that as long as you're peeing for less than 39 seconds, it is water efficient. So I don't know. I just thought that was interesting.
Another pro tip.
I had never wondered that.
Yeah, same.
Then there's the whole shower with your steady thing, right? That's water efficient, right?
That's true. The whole family.
Save water, shower with your steady. That was actually a Mad sticker in Mad magazine when I was a kid. Yeah, great suggestion.
You just brought up you were talking about traffic, and you said not to be critical of people who don't.
But I sounded pretty critical today.
You sounded pretty critical.
Sorry.
So, one of the things that we were going to talk about is criticizing other people's actions when it comes to carbon emissions and ecological footprint, and when it's fair to talk about and when it's not, and like what the line is.
As we've been criticizing people's actions for an hour and a half.
Mostly, though, we're really just making suggestions.
Right, for sure. And I think that's really important because I think that can really separate people even further if it comes as really condescending, like top down, this is what you bad people should be doing. I don't know, like trying to acknowledge that everyone isn't perfect and like we're all doing things that aren't good, but like anything you can do counts and like it's good. even if you're driving a Hummer and live in a mansion, if you can flush your toilet with gray water, that helps. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if, and even if it has a tiny impact, if it makes you feel good, there's no reason to stop. And it's got to make you feel better if you think about, what happens if thousands of us are doing this very thing, or millions of us, or billions of us. And so over the course of the coming weeks in the GrowthBusters podcast, I'm going to bring you some of my craziest obsessive compulsive little energy saving things that I do that you're going to think, wow, get this guy some therapy. But what the heck?
Right.
You're saving lives.
Yeah, if it's fun for you and it's doing something good, why not?
Yeah. And if you multiply it by, if you could multiply it by 1 billion, it would be something.
Yeah. Right.
It would allow some couple somewhere to have 1.1 children instead of just one.
Yeah. True. Yeah, but then a question I have is it ever appropriate to criticize other people's actions if I'm never going to be perfect. I'm never going to have my emissions down to 0 or negative, but at what point can we talk to each other and say hey, I don't think you had to have 3 steaks for dinner.
Yeah, that's tricky. That's challenging, and I don't know if we'll ever figure out a way to do that. But I can tell you one thing that I feel pretty confident about, and that is if you're doing nothing to minimize your footprint, then you really don't have a leg to stand on making, even suggesting someone else have fewer children. If you're sitting here in the United States and you are, hopping on a plane to go to rock concerts, and you have a vacation house in the mountains or in Phoenix or something like that, and you're busy saying those people in sub-Saharan Africa need to have fewer children, you just don't have a moral foundation.
But what if I think because it seems to me that the basis of that criticism is very condescending, but just the way you were saying of you shouldn't have children, you Africans, but what if you say it in a constructive manner, do you think it's still not right for people who are here in the U.S. using lots of resources to criticize?
I'd say it's still not. I think, I mean, certainly you don't want to ever do the condescending approach anyway.
For sure. Right.
Really better to not criticize. I think at some point people are going to have to be criticized for doing some stupid things, but especially like the populations in the countries that still have average fertility rates over 4 or over 5. A lot of the problem there is education, knowledge, awareness, access, affordability.
Sure.
That makes sense.
Yeah, then there's no reason to criticize them.
Right.
But you could and I wouldn't fault you for trying to for making your giving dollars available to help with those programs, but I think you would have a much more solid moral foundation if you were at the same time working very hard to clean up your own backyard.
Right. Yeah, no, I agree. And I think it just depends on, I think I was considering criticism more broadly of I think trying to develop those programs or help get education. I kind of consider that constructive criticism.
Fair enough. Yeah.
But then if we extend that to the U.S. too, and we talk about people who don't believe in climate change right now, maybe because they've grown up in an ideological circle where it's just not no one they know or are friends with believes in climate change.
How they live in Texas or something like that.
Maybe.
Just kidding. Just kidding, you Texans out there.
How do we start a conversation with those people without coming across as condescending? Because it's a problem in the U.S. to act like it's a privilege to know and believe in climate change. I think I had to be taught by someone.
Right. Yeah. I don't know. I wonder if there's a possibility to spin the other benefits outside of climate change, just because I think a lot of these things do have other benefits even if climate change didn't exist. You could spin it as energy independence, we're by building our own energy systems with solar and wind power, we're having energy independence from big oil companies and and like our trade deficit will go down. And so I think maybe there's something there that can be used to reach people who don't speak the same like environmental language. I don't know what you think about that.
Well, it gripes me that we have to even think along those lines.
Yeah.
You know, and I think it would be nice if this could be Adult Swim and we could just all have honest conversations about that. But I think, you know, it's a sad political reality that we might have,
Right.
you know, that in some cases you do have to spin it as you said it and focus on some of the other benefits. But ultimately, I'd like it to get to a point where we can really just have adult conversations about the facts.
Same, I agree. But I just think that's cutting out a large portion of the population.
Right, and not what's happening right now. I think that like we treat people like they're stupid for not knowing and believing the same things that we do. And yeah, I just think about like I grew up in really liberal circles. If I hadn't, I would probably be conservative.
Right. Well, and I also think from a statistics standpoint, I imagine that it's like, say there's like 60% of the population like understands climate change and believes that there are things to be done and have started doing things. And then the other 40% isn't very receptive to those ideas. The amount of growth potential is probably much greater in that 40%, like that they have to grow, you know? Like I feel like just because they drive Hummers and they like have big houses and don't really care about those things. So I feel like there's a lot to be cut from if we can find a way to reach that population.
Yeah.
Right.
And criticism isn't going to be the way.
No, because
Right,
that
right.
just further entrenches them.
Basically, you got to kidnap them and take them to the new Al Gore movie. Tie them to the chair and make them watch that.
Yeah, they would hate it.
Yeah, I don't know about that.
So we're running pretty long, so I think we should wrap up. We should declare this meeting adjourned. What do you say?
I think so.
Until
Sounds
next time.
All right.
That's the GrowthBusters podcast. Dave Gardner, thanks for listening.
Caitlin Hickman, double thanks.
Thanks from Ben Bacher.
See you next time.
Some may dream to pave mountains and streams, but not me. I'm a growth buster. Some may just want more, but don't know what it's for, but not me. I'm a growth buster. Don't want a solution at the cost of pollution. They think bigger is better at the cost of the weather. But no, not us. We are the growth busters. Calling, 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 calling. Call the growth busters.